doing this week? How was this week for you?
It was like fascinating, but like still pretty hard. I'm actually going to neuroscience after
Oh,
the
cool.
semester, so I'm
That'd be
just like trying to really engage, but I'm just like my eyes are like spinning with all this information.
Yeah, but that's good. You're because it's I'm trying to at least give you some depth to it, and not just the names and the things superficial. I mean, I hope hopefully you pick up a few, especially if you do neuroscience. The neuroplasticity stuff is sort of one of area that of course, I like the interest in that, but it's sort of new stuff. It's not just classic anatomy kind of stuff. Um, so you're picking up some interesting pieces.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I like your teaching style. Like definitely, it's just like a really hard subject matter.
Yeah.
Um, personally for me, but I think you're doing great.
Yeah, no, it's hard to study the brain, but if you guys feel it's hard, don't be discouraged. It's just the way it is in some ways. It's just the it's just look at my dog, he's getting tired and go sleeping. So yeah, just hang in there with it and ask me as many questions as you have, and if your interest is in such things, even after the class, just reach out. My text number will not change. That's my personal number. You can always use that. And I'm open for questions. I like this kind of stuff. Anybody else? We're getting a few people added on. How are you doing with last week?
It's been pretty good. It's been pretty good. Still catching up on a few things, but overall pretty good.
Okay, not too harried. Otherwise, you guys speak out, because ultimately it's you guys' learning experience, and I'm trying to facilitate it at the end of the day. Well, this week is a big week in terms of the pathology project filming type stuff. How are you guys doing with that?
I think it's been pretty good for me.
Okay, because I'm always very insecure about this project because it's a fairly big project. We're doing it online. It's sometimes depending on the group. Some groups don't work together that well. Some work really well. So I'm offering to always reach out to me. So please do that and text me, so I can help you and support you in the background if there is challenges with instructions or it's too difficult technologically speaking or so. Technology also changing so fast that I think but if I don't hear, I'm assuming you guys are doing okay. This week we're gonna do respiratory system, and we're gonna do the digestive system starting, which is fairly straightforward. Like, this is doing that, and this is called that kind of stuff. And then we have some little labeling things with that for the main anatomy terms that I like you to kind of familiarize with. We have some questions laid behind the lecture. And then this week, we are going to do a food journaling. And the food journaling, I don't like to worry about just counting calories and see how much food we eat. What I would like to focus more on in a journal sort of sense is what is my environment of eating food, or what am I doing it alone? Am I working through it? Am I watching a movie? Am I with people talking? Am I, how am I harried? I just want to get it down because I need to do so many things. So more like that gestalt around the eating, and also, is it soul food? What sort of my soul food? Because when I talk to patients, a lot of the times, um, they come in and say, "Oh, I have back pain, and my doctor said I just need to lose weight. Everything will be fine." And I'm like, "Well, great." But they never say how or any other things. And we all kind of know, our diet can be, it's difficult. We have everything on our fingertips, or many of us have everything on our fingertips, or then have a food desert where we don't really get anything other than processed food, which is of course also a problem that we continuously should get better at with public health kind of measures, at least where we can get it through clinics. But I think then I talk to the patient about, well, how are you going to lose some weight if you got to lose some weight, if that's a problem, and the conversation goes very fast into sometimes not even understanding necessarily the difference between a fat, a carb, and a protein, and then the world of fat-free that was created for the food industry completely messed with our head and understanding that, for example, if you have no fat in the food, you're gonna eat much more carbs because it's not satisfying. And so you gotta understand that and not just, say, oh, fat is bad, but also understand the difference between lard and avocado, for example. And so then those things become very fast a conversation because the more we understand, as we see with this Noom app that they do, the more we understand how foods function in our body and what they're used for, and the differences, or how many vegetables have more protein than meat, and how much meat we eat in this country, and I mean in the world generally at this point. When I go back to Switzerland, I'm often very surprised how much meat consumption is going on there too now as well. And then a lot of it is pork. Pork's very inflammatory. That's not necessarily a great food for somebody who has arthritic conditions or such. But nobody talks about that. So I would like the food journaling conversation more like a discussion in our own head about understanding our sort of proclivities, our relationship with food around it, and start having a conversation with ourselves about that. Because that's what I do with my patients. Next week, we'll talk a little bit about nutrition. I have one chapter on nutrition, and the food journaling I like to do for 5 days. And if it's very triggering to you as a person, because I know food is it's very, very important. What we eat is how we feel, and it's important of how we feel, because it's the soul food component. It makes us comfortable, but it also has a lot to do with, like, if we only eat, the food industry food, then we're also eventually become more depressed because the gut doesn't produce the right amount of nutrients, that dopamine and stuff like that makes us happy, that we don't even fully understand, or serotonin, for example, because medicine is applied medicine is often further behind than research medicine, and then school what we teach in anatomy and physiology is sometimes somewhere in between of it, but it often is sluggish too to change, because the fundamentals are sort of what we start with. So with this food journaling, I'd like to get us a bit more into also an application portion. So that was mainly that's the main thing I think this week, besides sort of the general anatomy physiology stuff. How did you guys like the gratitude journal? Was that helpful to do?
That was kind of fun.
Yeah, I like
I
that.
enjoyed it.
We'll have a little discussion this week and then finish up with that. And then the rest of the week is really about making the video of the presentation for the pathology. Do you guys have any questions in that regard, or how are you feeling about the video part making? Yeah, that's what I texted this morning, is like, it's not the easiest project for me to do online either, because of those kind of energies sometimes, and some students are not. It's difficult and it's an anxiety thing, presenting something, so it's easy for us to put it on the back burner and procrastinate. So I'm fully aware of also those things, and so that's why I try to strive wherever I can support, because I still want to do it, because for many it's a really valuable experience, and many of students in the past always like doing it.
Yeah, in my communications class, we did a group project together, and it was super fun.
Good. Yeah, no, and wherever is that an in-person group class or an
No,
online?
it was online.
Was online. Well, then maybe offline you can get me some tips from that side, what was more working easier than what I'm doing.
Okay, for sure.
Because it's I'm always trying to improve, and I know I have an idea, and then it's got to figure out how to make it, and you guys have to suffer through it a little bit, but ultimately we get somewhere. I started the pathology project because I had a student who had a kid who had asthma, and she was in the emergency room instead of the test one semester in person still we did. And I said, so what did they help you with? And they gave her albuterol, or the kid, and not anything else. And it was like, it was like, well, there's a whole bunch of other things we can do to kind of maybe mitigate some of the symptomatology or the body's response to then creates the symptoms. And that's when I started realizing that the doctors often just don't have the time to go into certain things that, are also working. And we just go right to the essence of what works best or most efficient. And then that's what we do, especially obviously in a situation of an emergency when you have a kid who just can't breathe no more because of the asthma and so attack. But it's also disempowering for the person themselves. And so that's where I started doing this project, and I'm still running with it. We're going to talk about the lungs and the breathing apparatus. And really the most important thing there was we need for physiology perspectives is two things. We need to bring stuff in to the lungs, and then we have it go into the bloodstream. Of the bloodstream, then it can go into the cells, and in the cell, what we get here mostly is the oxygen, and the oxygen then in the cell helps make ATP and energy, and then the cell can use that energy to do all its works that it needs to do. And so that's really what we do with the lungs. And so we briefly talk about the anatomy where we breathe, the nases, the nose, and the trachea, the voice box as well, and then we get into the bronchi as we get into the lungs. The interesting thing about the wind tube here, as compared to the food tube that we talk next time, or it's the second chapter this week, which runs behind it. Both systems get the food, the liquid, and the air coming in through the nose and the mouth, and then go into at the larynx and before here, that back here we call that the pharynx, and then at the voice box area, where right around here, that splits and the air goes into a trachea, which is a tube that is held open by cartilage rings because air can't push things open, but the tube where then the liquid and the food go in is behind it, and that's the esophagus. And the food, and that's collapsed, and when food or water goes in, then it opens up because it's strong enough to push it down the lungs, and we sort of start losing more those cartilaginous rings because the structure of the lungs becomes harder or more defined and held together and open. And then the air ultimately reaches little air sacs called alveoli, and they are attached to blood vessels on the other side. And that's where the oxygen travels across the membrane, purely passively, really, by a suction of event of like the blood oxygen concentration is less than the air oxygen concentration right at that membrane, and so the oxygen will get pulled through the membrane, and it's that thin, and so that's pretty cool. And then from there the oxygen travels into the bloodstream, through the bloodstream into the cells, and in the cells it makes ATP, and then that does all the other stuff that we talked in the cellular chapter with. And of course, then the other thing is we get rid of toxins, the carbon dioxide in particularly, we get rid of that by breathing it out. And that's the byproduct of when we use the oxygen to make ATP, we get carbon dioxide and we breathe that out. And so that is sort of how that respiratory system mainly works. And we have to be getting air in, and that's the breathing. And the lungs are actually attached to the chest wall and the diaphragm. And then as we breathe, they expand, and that expansion passively brings air in. And so that's also described in this chapter, is how the serous membrane system works. That's this one. And what is more to that? Well, the other thing that's more to this system is also the sinuses, which some of us probably have some sinus issue these days. I do. Wake up with some not so much head clarity unless I take Claritin or something else, although I tried to not take too much of that, but I had to resort to some of it a little bit. I try to go with the natural route, which at Sprouts I get this thing called sinus blaster, and it's based on horseradish. So you spray it in your mouth and it clears up your sinuses because it's like you're eating too much wasabi or something. But that's kind of funny, and works pretty well actually if it's not too much. Like now it's just horrible for many of us. But anyway, the other thing, so the sinuses are there. We should talk about where they are and which ones can cause trouble. And then we finish up with the chapter with phonation, or we don't finish that up, it's somewhere in between. But the last thing we talk about is making sound, and the sound is produced by vocal cords like strings on like a guitar string that are in this larynx in here, and they have little structures, little bones that can move, and as they move the strings a little further apart or closer together, and that depends on the depth of the sound in phonation, and when they vibrate, then that's the sound being made. And a lot of letters are made in the mouth with the tongue, and some of them are made down here. The vocals are made down there, more or less. Or so at least that's what we're told in the books. I have heard some discussion that that's not really fully how it works, but I haven't been able to go too much deeper into the later science on that. So, but if you know more because you're into that field, then let me know, please. And I'm learning more of how things work. That's the interesting part about science. We can always learn more about things. And so that pretty much that pretty much is the respiratory system. And then as we move into digestion, we start talking about how we take in food that is like a piece of bread, for example, and how it breaks it down in the teeth. We break it down, and we have saliva has amylase in it. That's why you want to chew your bread more than once and swallow it. You want to chew it 24 times, as your mother probably told you, or at least your grandmother. That would be my mother, probably. Well, who knows? I'm sorry, I shouldn't imply that. But our ancestors sometimes have some interesting insight that who knows if they knew, but that chewing the bread along a lot versus just swallowing big chunks of food is because breaking down the food smaller with the teeth helps to digest. And digestion means breaking down the food into small enough particles that then we can assimilate the food and take it from the gut wall into the bloodstream. And then from there, it can move into the cells like the oxygen did. It's a little more complicated than that because we got to break everything down into a glucose level type thing. That's why carbohydrates are so easy to be taken up, because there's so much glucose. And the more processed, the faster it goes into the bloodstream, because the glucose is easier to be taken up by the cell. But with missing fiber that comes with less processed food, that also wears out the system faster of taking glucose into the cell. And then that is the foundation of diabetes, when we wear out the system of how glucose goes into the cell. And some of that is intrinsic, because we all come with a set of quality of different things. I have a fair amount of problems with the musculoskeletal system, for example, but generally my family doesn't get diabetes. But some of that we can influence by what types of food we eat, and we do that best when we understand how it works. And so in this chapter, we're going to learn some of that breaking down of the food into small enough particles that the system can assimilate it, put it into the bloodstream, and then the cell. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how different foods like protein and fats get taken into the cell as well. So we talk about all the different food particles in that respect. But the important thing there, right, is digestion is breaking down the food. So a large portion of the digestive system has to do with the breaking it down mechanically, the teeth, but also the stomach wall, when the stomach growls, that churning motion that gets created. And then chemically, that starts in the mouth with amylase breaking down sugars, in the gut with protein by the acidity breaking down proteins, and then the fats start more in the smaller gut in here, well, throughout, but chemically with lipases that are in the first part of the small gut. There's a lot of chemical reactions happening there of food breakdown, and then it gets brought from there in this larger small intestine section into the bloodstream. And so that tube is very long. So there's a lot of surface area that the particles can be brought into the bloodstream. And then another thing that's really interesting in this chapter is the fact that the immune system is very, very involved with the gut. So there's a lot going on with immune function and not getting sick in the gut, which kind of makes sense if we think about it, because a lot of stuff that comes into the system comes through the mouth as an orifice, and how many things does a kid put into its mouth, and we have to, and hopefully that's more natural stuff and not. I had this person that said, like, they were in Switzerland. They were talking about these cheap from China things that you can buy now in Switzerland and Europe a lot. And I forgot a Temu or something, I think is the app. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. And this person was saying, like, well, at least we don't get some real stuff. We only get children toys and stuff. And I'm like, no, don't, because that's what we don't understand is when we use chemicals and things in toys, and a lot of times then when they come from abroad, they're not regulated as heavily as when they are done inside our own country with our rules and regulations. That can be very dangerous because chemicals can be very toxic for our system. But natural stuff like bacteria are little small things, and so the system has a much easier time and is a natural way to creating the immunity to it. And that's what we're also talking here. That's very similar to, we talked in the immune system about that. It's very similar to the vaccines, how they work, but it's naturally done. And so the immune system has a big task to do in the gut. So there's a lot of that in there. And it's also important for us to know that to keep it as healthy as possible. So that's where we talk about the healthy bacteria also that we don't want to destroy in the gut. So that's also partly in this discussion in here as well. And what else is there? Well, and in terms of the gut, well, we also then have to process whatever we can't use from the food, and in a way that we extract as much liquid out of it. We do that in the colon, in the large intestine, and then compact it enough that we end up having a good old we can get rid of it nicely and have a good old poop. And of course we don't talk in this chapter about it, but what is very interesting is some medical, like Tibetan medicine, for example, looks heavily at things like urine to understand what's going on in the system, as well as the feces, because it does in their understanding of medicine, and their understanding of medicine is very deep. I've studied some of the stuff. In their understanding of medicine, it has a lot of value to analyze things like that. And so there you have that system. For the most part is technology, and we have to be careful to not everything be like technology is the only way of doing it. So I know this semester around it's coming to a close, so we probably don't, and since we are online, more everything is done on the online platform. But I want to keep in mind and also tell you for the future, always keep in mind what is the outcome, what you want. I was in a discussion forum with a faculty on last week on AI cheating. And I talked to one of my patients who is at the board of Berkeley about how the UC Berkeley is doing that. And he was also saying, as a lot of the professors at the CC level do, if I see you having AI in your system or anything, then you get, it's cheating. And I am very strongly under the opinion, and so is the person who does course design at Merced, who is one of my superiors and has a PhD in that kind of stuff, pedagogy and things, that we need to incorporate AI into our doing, because it is in the marketplace. Half the people in the marketplace are using it already. I'm figuring out how to use it in my practice as well, depending on what I'm doing, or at least use programs that assist me in what I'm doing. And so I want to encourage you guys to be creative in all different ways. That means if it feels better to do something hands-on, to have a project with it, do a project with it. Because one of the things, for example, my design professor said, look, if we have a class of baking bread, isn't it better to bake a bread as a final project versus writing a report about baking bread? Which, you know, is a difference, of course, in that sliver of discussion about AI. AI can just do it and you put it in, and then, you know, you have some algorithm that tries to think if you're cheating or not, which they are not working that well. As well, they flag the wrong stuff very often because they just look for patterns. Or is it better to do something with it, like we did, you know, for example, squats to feel the low leg muscles, or baking bread as a final project? And so I know that just came out of nowhere a little bit, but it's been bugging me since ever we talked about it within different professor circles. And I want to make sure that I translate over to you guys what is going on in those discussions, because you will be the ones who will be using those things as we go forward. And it's very new stuff, so we don't necessarily know. So if you know, I'm looking now for AI that creates presentations, for example. And then I make a presentation. I have AI make a presentation. I'm going to see, and I'm going to take from the ideas that I can, and then create a product that is, you know, my product, but it is assisted and helped with by outside or AI technology as well, for example. So I just wanted to say that and see if anybody has a comment on it as well.
I think that AI. I have a daughter who's she's attending Santa Cruz right now, and she's told me about it with her friends. They say that they incorporated a lot in their schoolwork, not necessarily to plagiarize, but they say that they're able to get a lot of ideas or how to reword things based on how they're doing it. So, like I said, it's just another tool. It's almost like Googling in a sense. So,
no,
but
I'm
you still have to.
Santa Cruz uses it like that, or the professors that she's working with. I was kind of shocked in that faculty discussion. There's two of us that showed up at a Homer set just to do, you know, it's like a lot of them are not like thinking about it quite yet. So I'm really glad to hear that. That's great. And encourage you guys to do that. I encourage you guys to do that. And you can quote me on that if somebody gives you crap.
Yeah, it's just one last thing I want to say about AI is that it's not really 100% reliable. You know, you have to do a lot of fact checking because it has a lot of errors in it too. So it's really important to kind of do your homework.
Absolutely. So that's why you know, I think ultimately it's a great idea giver. Or for me, it's excellent to the grammar ChatGPT I use, because, you know, English is a second, third language for me, as many of you guys too. And so it gives me a lot of input of how to word something different and helps me with that, for example.
Yeah. I subscribe to Grammarly, and they have like an AI little thing that pops up, and you can like type in ideas for your writings and stuff. And I think it's super useful in that sense. Because like I'm not a good writer. And so I know when I was in English, I didn't like plagiarize or anything, but for ideas on how to like word things, like you were saying, it was super helpful.
No, I totally encourage that. I have Grammarly too. I don't have the premium. I ended up getting the ChatGPT one for this semester because I got to write this class, and apparently I can get a lot of help. So I'm probably going to put the textbook into the thing and say, tell me this in a way that I can understand it. And then maybe we'll get because I find that a lot in textbook, they're way too language heavy, especially in the field that I'm teaching it. Okay. Anybody else? Thoughts?
Yeah. I think like AI and like ChatGPT is like good for like maybe explaining like a certain subject, or being like, oh, could you like putting something in, being like, oh, summarize this, or like give me the main points, so that like you can like, so if something's like really language heavy, so that it could be like distilled down into something that's more easily read, or that you can understand better. But like also I feel like, you know, it's very obvious when somebody uses AI to like do an assignment for them.
It is, right?
Yeah, it's very, very obvious.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right. If not, we'll close it out. I wish you guys a wonderful week, and thank you for paying attention and continually showing up. I'm really enjoying working with you all.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. M.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.